Hello everyone, this is the third video in a three-part video series for Einstein Analytics, creating a simple dashboard. What we're going to be doing in this video is going over a couple of more advanced topics, which are results binding and static binding. I call these advanced topics because this involves getting a little bit more familiar with the back side of the dashboard. And the back side of the dashboard is what happens when you hold your control key and press E and you start looking at what's called the JSON for the dashboard. There are some improvements that Einstein has made so that you don't necessarily need to go to that back end completely, but it still is advanced because the concepts of taking the results from one set of dashboards and using those as a filter criteria for another is something that's kind of tough to wrap your head around, and that's called results binding. The other one is for static binding, is basically where we're going to take a pick list, a custom-made manual pick list, and have a selection that's made there alter the dashboard structure. And that can be either simple or dramatic. And so this is a static binding. This down here is a results binding, which is the products purchased with opportunities. And so we're going to recreate those simple bindings in our simple opportunity dashboard here. And I'll explain them as we do them. So let's go ahead and get started. We'll first get started with the static binding. So when I want to make a static binding, I'm going to go edit the dashboard and I'm going to drop a list onto the page. The first step you're going to do is click on the list and then change data set, and you're going to say create custom query. This is essentially going to let you just create a little table manually from scratch, and then you can use that to alter the dashboard. So I'm going to make one value called display, another called value. Whoops. Add column, dimension. Sorry, I'm doing this wrong. To add column text. There we go. And then we're going to rename the label, call this value. So right now my charts on the page are being measured by the amount, but we're going to make it so that the user who's viewing the dashboard can measure them by expected amount instead if they'd like. So we'll make the first one called amount. The second value will be called expected amount. And that's really all we're going to do right here. I'm going to go ahead and press done. And then we're going to go to the advanced editor. And then we're going to switch over to the query. Now for the static binding, we're going to have to be changing the columns here and the values down here. So I'm going to be a little bit lazy and just copy from the other one. So I need to copy, so display, order value, and step property. Let's go ahead and copy these. Let me put it in a notepad. And then I also need to get a few values here. Alright, so let's go ahead and move back to the other dashboard. Go to Advanced Editor. And we'll go ahead and copy the columns. And this is why I call it advanced. I mean, I'm copying this from another dashboard because, you know, just typing out the structure here can be a little bit intimidating for newer people. But once you've done this once or twice, you'll get the hang of it. And you'll be able to copy from other dashboards as well. And the only reason I'm needing to really edit this in the JSON is because of the more complicated part, which is the step property here having two different values. This is going to be a tough thing to wrap your head around, but essentially what's going to happen is when the user selects amount, we're going to take the value that's in order value, which is some amount, and what's in the step property, some amount, and it's going to go alter the other two charts and how they're being measured. I'll get to that in a moment. So let's go ahead and save this. View it. I see amount and expected amount. Right now it doesn't do anything. Let's get rid of the widget actions. Let's go ahead and color it a little bit more as well. Go ahead and copy the background style. Okay, and we're going to title this Measure By. Okay, so when this changes, I want this and this to be updated. To, instead of being sum of amount, to be sum of expected amount. Now, if you were to open this up and go to the Fields panel and type in amount, you'll see amount and expected amount. The API name for expected amount is just expected revenue, and amount is amount. And so that's why when you look at the advanced query over here, where we have amount, some amount, amount, and if they select expected amount, it is some expected revenue, some expected revenue. So this will be a tough one to grasp your head around in terms of what exactly is happening, but bear with me. All right, so we're going to go ahead and have to copy, let's see, what I'm going to do next is I'm going to actually open up the advanced editor for the first chart, go into the query, and rather than it being a static value that is just some amount, I'm going to replace it with this. And I'll explain the components of this. This is essentially saying take whatever value from static 1 selection is in step property and place it here. Now let's see if this gives me an error. Yeah, it did. And part of the reason is I need to check the, okay, it is called static 1. So the ID of the step in the static step that you're working with is what's going to drive this over here. Once you've updated this, you need to go to more details, cannot read property null. So I need to make sure this is always selected by default. So let's go ahead and click on the ellipsis, pick initial values, and select amount. There we go. So that luckily worked out. Now I'm going to do a couple of other things on this chart here. I want the order by to be whatever it is that I'm selecting. So let's go ahead and go to the advanced editor, go to the query, and rather than being a static value in the order, we're going to replace it with a dynamic one. Static 1 selections order value. Let's go ahead and look at this just so you can see how this is working. You got columns called step property, order value, and the display. and the display is what shows up on the screen. Order value is essentially what I'm trying to have the chart sort by. I could have called this sort value. And the other one is step property, which is actually going deep into the query of the step of the chart, and it's basically saying, hey, use the sum of the amount or the sum of the expected revenue. Let's go ahead and look at that. Another thing is you got to update the column maps. So let's go ahead and go into the advanced editor. Anytime you're using static binding, you're going to want to remove these column maps. It gives because the column map is a very static set of structure for the widget, and when you start going into static binding, you need it to be dynamic, and it knows enough to know that it needs to listen to whatever you're doing in the binding once you remove the column map, and you need to do the same thing over in the query as well. Save. Let's check the error message here. I'm going to check my order statement here. Looks correct. Let's go ahead and check what it looks like over here. That's what I did wrong. So you'll see this and you'll experience this every now and then. It'll take some practice and time. Very rare do you have a good experience when you're going into the static and results binding. There we go. That fixed that. So now let's see. If I switch between amount and expected amount, now it's actually changing what it's measuring by and sorting by at the same time. So you have to do those same steps to the second chart as well. So that's the unfortunate thing. Once again, if you did the static step first, then you copied the widget, you'd save yourself an extra step. Let's try this one more time. Let's go to the query. There we go. And then the measure, we're going to do this. And then we got to remove the column maps. All right, let's see if that worked. And it did. All right, so that's how you do static binding. We're going to go and look a little closer at some of these queries. Once you put a binding on it, you cannot just double click this anymore, unfortunately. And so it's the last step you want to do anytime you're working on a chart. So this is what a query typically looks like from a user-friendly stance. If you go into any more like challenging queries, it gets a lot uglier, and ultimately it ends up looking a lot more like a SQL query from a Microsoft SQL Server or Oracle. But as long as you can get away with very simple structures from your data sets, you don't need to get into anything too complicated. That might be a more of an advanced topic to cover. All right, so the last thing to do is results binding. So we're going to put a chart onto the page that's going to show us quantity of products associated with opportunities. and that's going to be driven by whatever bar up top gets pressed, so you can dive down a little deeper. So unfortunately, that's going to require a results binding, because the products associated with an opportunity are children of the opportunity. So at this point, we would be looking at a different data set. So in order to do that, we are going to have to go update our data flow in the data manager. And when you're working with the data flow, you need to remember what objects are associated to other objects. And so it can be hard for me to even remember at times. And so I know that I need to pull in opportunity products, and I need to join those together. And then I'll register a new data set called opportunity products. So let's go ahead and do that in my data flow. So let's go and do an SFDC register products. And I know that products2 is the API name of their product object. So do ID, name. I think that's everything we need from that one. The next one is opportunity product. And I know that this one is actually called opportunity line item. That's the unique API name of the opportunity product object. So for this one, we're going to take the list price, the opportunity ID, the ID of the product, maybe the product code and the quantity, unit price, total price, and then create. Now we're going to join these two together. Called augment op product to product. So remember, you're always coming from the child to the parent, and one product can have many opportunity products. So you'll start with opportunity products. I'll fix that typo. We're going to join based on the product ID. Give it the relationship a name. Join on the ID, and then select the name. Fix that. Now I think I have everything we need. So now we're just going to register it. And then we grab the last one. Give it a name and an alias, and go ahead and create that. Now we'll update the data flow and then run it. Once it's done running, we'll go back to our dashboard and finish up the results binding. So opportunity products are a standard object in Salesforce. This whole demonstration has actually been done completely just using the out-of-the-box development tool. Sorry, the out-of-the-box development org that Salesforce offers for Einstein Analytics. And it's something that is, this entire thing should be pretty replicatable. All right, now we got our data set. Let's go back to Einstein Analytics. We got to go back to our shared app, since that's likely where it was placed. Here it is. We're going to go ahead and move it to our simple dashboard demo app. And now that it's there, I'm going to save this and then refresh. Because if I don't refresh, I won't see the new data set on this page as a selectable option. All right, so now what I want to have happen is I want to make it so that when I click on one of these segments here, I want to see the products associated with those opportunities show up in a graph down here. So what I'm going to do is a results binding. To do a results binding, you're going to make two charts, or at least you're going to have to start with one chart. The first chart is going to be the list of results that are going to suppress or join that second data set. I'll show you what I mean. So I'm going to continue to use the simple opportunity data set, and for my bars I'm going to use the ID of the opportunities. The limit for the query is normally 1 to 10,000. We're going to select 10,000 and press done. And then in the advanced editor, we're going to actually increase that. We'll call it 30,000. You've got to be careful with it when it comes to the volume of the data that you're working with on the dashboard. This results bindings do have limitations. However, it works great. It works great for thousands of records or tens of thousands. But you will come into some limitations with results binding if you try to use hundreds of thousands and things like that. However, it's great for consolidated data sets, and if you're only working with a smaller set. So it's just a list of all of the opportunity IDs associated with this dashboard. And so what happens is when you click on one of these segments now, notice how this thing, it gets segmented down to the two IDs of the opportunities within those within the selection. And so now I'm going to take the results of this chart down here and have that be what uses a statement or a filter on the opportunity products bar chart. So let's do that next. So now we're going to go ahead and drag a chart onto the screen. Instead of using a simple opportunity data set, I'm going to press back, and then we're going to use opportunity products data set. So it's going to be standard we use product name, sort it by accounts, and that's about it. Now we're going to make it look a little nicer. Let's go ahead and copy the style from a different one. Get rid of the widget actions. Give it a theme. And let's get rid of some of these y-axis titles. And we'll give it a title. Call it Opportunity Products. Associated with the above. I am not going to have a legend, so we're going to remove that. And so you could do the count of opportunity products. So this should tell you 148 times cables has been added to opportunities. Or you could do the revenue dollars. And you could just come over here and change it to be sum of maybe the quantity or the price. Let's just go with quantity for now. So we'll do, make it clear, put a subtitle, quantity. And because I have that, I'm not going to put the header on there. All right, so now I need this to get filtered by the list over here. And that's where we get into results binding. It's a pretty simple step, but interpreting what's happening is not. So we're going to click on this. We're going to go to the advanced editor. We're going to go to the query. And then in the query, we're going to add a filter. I'm going to put it right here. So filters after groups. And we're going to take the opportunity ID and make sure that it's only going to display if it's in the list from the other chart. So I'll have to check a couple of things here. I think that looks good. Okay, looks good. Let's see if that worked. All right, it worked. So now, in effect, while you can't normally facet between data sets, you can do this kind of results binding join that will allow you to almost facet within data sets simply. So now we just want to remove the widget that's doing this over here. The underlying query behind that widget is still going to stay in the dashboard. Save your work, and then I'll explain what just happened there on the query. So there's a query on the JSON that has the ID of ID_1. That was the one that we just deleted a second ago. So that query is still somewhere on the dashboard. It's in the JSON, and the results of that, essentially all the IDs from that result are going to be used to suppress our chart because now it's sitting in the filter section. So there's a lot of powerful things you can do with results binding and static binding especially that can really change the entire layout of a dashboard because you would be surprised where you can actually put these bindings within the page. So when I go and press Control E, it takes me to the JSON behind the scenes. You can see here's the name of the step or the query, and the step or the query is actually still there, is still hidden somewhere on the dashboard so that it can be used somewhere else. Now it's smart enough to know it's being used elsewhere, And that's where you'll actually see in your queries in your dashboard all your used and unused queries and widgets. And so if you have anything that's not being used anymore, it's going to let you know it's not being used and ask you if you want to delete it later. So this is why I call this an advanced topic, because trying to wrap your head around the static binding and the results binding and how it's actually working from a JSON standpoint can take some time, because you have to imagine, okay, when I click on one of these bars over here, what's really happening is there's an underlying query that's being filtered down to just a few opportunity IDs that's ultimately suppressing the results down here. So that's it'll take some time to get familiar with that. There are a couple of references and PDFs from Salesforce that are very helpful. If you just go to Google and type in JSON reference Einstein Analytics or static binding reference Einstein Analytics or results binding Einstein Analytics, you'll see an entire PDF that goes over all the different options that you have for doing some pretty cool flexible stuff on these dashboards using the bindings or tweaking the JSON behind the scenes to make something look a little different. So that's the end of the video. This is once again, this is the more complex and advanced topic. I can't stress enough that having someone there to train you and answer your questions will really help you accelerate your learning. And thanks for watching.